I came home a few weeks ago, late at night, and I heard the sounds of church hymns playing from the TV that Lisa was watching. And I immediately thought to myself, what's going on here? That's kind of weird. Not that Lisa's not a church hymn kind of girl, but if you've ever heard her sing, you would understand why I might be suspicious about this. So I had to investigate further. And upon investigation, I found that she was watching this brand new series on Netflix called The Crown. It tells the story of Queen Elizabeth II, her rise to power and some of the issues she had to deal with as she was the queen, a young queen, and then as she's moved through her reign. And Lisa loves it, and one of the things that has endeared her to it and made it so interesting for her is how it presents the fact that the King and the Queen of England see the monarchy as a call from God. And thus the reason that church hymns were playing, because it was depicting a scene where Queen Elizabeth was being crowned in the church as church hymns were singing. And the series picks up and shows some of the struggles that the monarchy has had because they see this authority as a call and a gift from God, and yet dealing with the royal scandals, divorces and other things, and how that conflicts with the call and the will of God. Today, Christ the King Sunday entered into the church's calendar almost 100 years ago in the aftermath of World War I. See, the people were really anxious and fearful. They had seen all the tensions that brought the world to this moment and plunged it into this First World War with all its devastation, with all its pain. And the church, as it observed this and saw the skepticism that the people had regarding their worldly leaders and whether or not they were doing the right thing, the church said, we've got to find a way again to remind the people that there is one true eternal King who never lets us down. So in that time of anxiety and fear, Christ the King Sunday entered into the church's calendar so that every year we focus on the eternal reign and the hope that comes through Jesus. Now, I love the timing of Christ the King Sunday this year, as it comes 11 days after our election day. As we've talked about so much over the last few months, we see in this process how so many of our earthly leaders wear tarnished crowns. More than any other election cycle in a long time, this one has worn us down. It's filled a lot of people with fear and with anxiety. And yet we're in the right place right now. Because as we gather here in these gifts of God, God comes to us to remind us that in the midst of it there is still Christ our King. And what's wonderful and what characterizes Jesus' reign as our King that is so opposite and different from the leaders and the kings and the presidents and the queens of this world is how Jesus reigns in our lives. Most of our earthly leaders and kings find their authority in power and strength, the ability to conquer others, the ability to rule over others. And yet we see that what marks Jesus as our King eternal is not those things. But in the Lenten gospel, the main gospel for this Sunday, we see that Jesus' true power actually comes in the moment that appears to be naked weakness and humility. There he hangs on the cross between the two criminals, as if it wasn't bad enough that he is suffering the death penalty that he does not deserve, paying for the sins of others. He's got a bunch of people around him mocking him because he's not the kind of king that the world has come to expect. If you're the king, if you're so powerful, why don't you come down from there? And the two criminals dying there, one of them also has to mock him. Come on, where's your power now, Jesus? Get up and get off of that cross. And yet it's the other criminal. In the midst of that moment where Jesus is hanging there in weakness, being humiliated, being derided by others, that the other criminal reaches out to Jesus for some sort of hope, some sort of comfort. Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And setting aside his own suffering, setting aside his own needs, he looks at that criminal and he gives him what he's looking for. Today, you will be with me in paradise. That's what marks the reign of Christ the King in our lives by our baptisms. That's what's at the heart of our God and our Creator. Nearly 100 years ago, Christ the King Sunday was added into the church's calendar to mark the end of the church year. It was to remind the people that even though things come to an end, and even when things come to an end and change, they bring about anxiety and fear often, that God is still in control, that God still reigns. And if you've noticed over the last several weeks as we've come to the end of this season after Pentecost, there has been a shift of our focus towards the end of things. It started on All Saints Sunday, where we remembered those who have gone on before us, those who are no longer with us, the loss that we had, the change that's happened as they are now in eternal life. And now it culminates today on Christ the King Sunday, where we remember the kingdom eternal that we're all citizens of. And as we talk about the end of time, as we talk about the end of our lives, our God knows that sometimes that creates some anxiety and fear. And so Christ the King Sundays to mark the end of our time, to remind us that our King and our kingdom last forever. And the movement of our liturgy this morning, as you've seen, has reminded us again of the whole church year, has moved us symbolically through all the main points of the church year to make the simple point that from Advent to Pentecost, throughout our lives, whatever the situation and year may be, God reigns eternal through Christ our King. And that's the simple message that we need over and over again. And that's the simple message we receive over and over again in Word and Sacrament. That no matter who leads us in this world, no matter what the time may be in history, no matter what the struggles are that surround us, Christ is our King. And he's not a king who rules us by power and strength. He's the King who rules by sacrifice, mercy,